Yo, Alexander here, Studio Draxi. Trying to record this video. I keep getting all kinds of weird noises and things happening, but we're going to go ahead anyways. So, quick shout out to Designspo. They actually articulated a really nice breakdown of how to do website design. And a lot of that sort of helps explain my workflow as far as level design. First thing, I like to hop into Paint because you don't need crazy high fidelity sketches of what you're doing. You just need to get your ideas together. Main thing is it has to have purpose. Anytime you build a level, there's a reason you're building a level. So you think about what it needs to encompass, what stuff you need to include in there. If you're building like a horror game where it has to have really narrow hallways and you want to have that crowded sort of claustrophobic experience, you're going to think, well, how close does the camera need to be to the player? How does my level need to behave as far as what I'm presenting to the player to get that emotion across? That's just stuff that you sort of think about in the design process, and that goes as far as saying like how low should the ceiling be, and like how are they going to move around, and yeah, I think that's really important early on to sort of go through that journey of how do I want the player to feel playing this. Do I want them to feel like, oh, there's this, grand, massive room that they walk into, and it's like, how do I open up the room into that? A lot of stuff like that you just want to do early on and think about how that's going to feel playing these different areas. Um, there's really going to be two types of designs that I would say. One is going to be like open world. If you're designing open world, I say start with like a nice big flat terrain and start sort of crafting the different spaces into that area. And sometimes you can just play around with that and sort of be like, well, let me throw a lake here and see how this feels. With that workflow, you can kind of hop straight into level design without doing a whole lot of mapping out. But you could still plan, like, let's say you want to have a camp here, and then you're like, well, let's have some really big area here, and we want to have like a fence around it or something. And maybe there'll be some mountains down below, or, whatever you want to do to map that out, just to get an idea for this is what's going to happen. Here's how the weather is going to affect things. Here's how the sun will be. Maybe you want to have a river and it's not going to make sense to have a river in a certain spot. So you have to think of that ahead of time. Like, okay, it should be coming down from the mountains and it's not going to go through the fence because that would have to be sort of bridged over. So maybe that's something you build into there and you say, well, let's do some type of little like fence bridge feature where the river can run through. But you don't want to be building it out and then halfway through you're like, oh yeah, I was going to have a river and I forgot to put that in there. So it's good to just kind of map it out and think of the different things you want to include down the road. As far as when you're doing interior, that's something that I've had quite a bit of experience doing. We used to build VR spaces, a lot of stuff in VR chat, just because we didn't have to worry about building a system to operate in the space. VR chat already handles all that. They handle, the character creation stuff. They handle how people are going to be interacting in the space. You just have to worry about the space itself. So a lot of times I would meet with whoever was commissioning and I would say, okay, what do we need to have in here? Like, what's the point of this room? And a lot of times they would say, oh, well, I want like, sort of a nice little entryway where we're going to have some posters and stuff like that. That'll be like your spawn in area where you can adjust your player height and all that. And then maybe we'll want to have like sort of a grand room that's really big. And then we say, okay, well, we want to see this when we're walking in, but we kind of want to like make players wait. So this actually just happened in a build, and I was like, well, why don't we put like a nice little staircase that kind of wraps around, so you can kind of look down into that area you're heading into, but you don't necessarily get there right away. So the players come in, they see this as they're walking down to it. Makes for a really nice like grand entrance to a place. And then they say, well, we also want to have like a stage area where they can practice. And I'm like, okay. So then we end up building a little stage off to the side. And then I think we wanted like a hot tub that we put in there, hot tub room. And then we had sort of like a cozy couch area. And that became pretty much the layout that we wanted. And a lot of the stuff, once we got that built, we said, okay, well, we want to have like some cool features. Like I think we put a logo over here. And then we said, well, let's do like a little waterfall and like maybe some plants. So we did some foliage along here and we just sort of built it out like that. We ended up with a fireplace, some couches. And so this became sort of like the way that we would design it is like, let's put all the stuff that needs to happen. Let's put all the necessity in here. Let's have a purpose for all the areas we're building. And then we can sort of randomize stuff. So once we had the layout done, then I said, okay, well, let's make this room higher. And so when we were in 3D, then I started raising different areas, lowering different areas, testing out where we're going to need staircases and how it's going to flow from one area to the next. And a lot of that it sort of built itself, I would say. It just made sense in certain parts, you know. Like if you wanted to have a den and you say, well, let's lower the fireplace so you can kind of walk down into this area and sort of make this its own little section. It fits nice with the space. It's not something where it's going to be sticking out like a sore thumb. And for some reason, if something was, that's when you go back to the drawing board and you say, well, what purpose does this serve and why is it becoming an issue and how do we solve this? And you kind of go back to the drawing board like we're doing. So let me go back to the start of this. To say like if we're doing game development, obviously there's certain mechanics you're hoping to incorporate into a game. There's certain areas you want to have for certain reasons. I'm not going to know about that stuff, but I would say start mapping out like what's it going to feel like to spawn in? Do you want your player to have sort of a tutorial room? Do you want them to have an area to sort of learn the game mechanics? Like a lot of this stuff, it's incorporated into games like without really, like you don't get to see that design process, but it does exist there. So I would say generally a lot of games, that's a good start. Say, let's have a bigger room where we kind of explore the mechanics of the game. Maybe you have jumping and you say, okay, well, let's have just a general hallway where they can learn that mechanic of jumping. And you say, well, let's put some obstacles in here. Maybe you have like the floor broken away a little bit and you say, well, let's sort of have like something to jump over, you know, just so players see that and they say, okay, I have to figure out how to do this. Maybe you have some type of tutorial that pops up in the UI that says, you know, here's how you jump. Maybe you have collectibles. Maybe we have like little platforms with collectibles on them. And that's where you teach players like you have to get these collectibles to open up the next area. And then you say, okay, well, what's another mechanic you'd want to teach? Maybe it's like a first person shooter type game. And you say, okay, well, we're going to have an area where they're going to pick up, you know, guns or whatever, have some targets. So then you say, okay, well, let's put the targets in here. And they can be placeholders, you know, they don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be fully fleshed out to start with, but it gives you a really nice blocked out experience to say, well, is this even fun to play? Does this make sense? Can a player figure this out? And I think that when you're designing with purpose like that, it kind of builds itself. It really makes a space that is easy to work with because you know what's supposed to be there and why. If you just say, well, I need a place to play my game, it's like, well, you could build anything. You could literally just have an endless list of things to build, and it doesn't really help you design a space until you know what the purpose of the space is. So, again, maybe we say, like, there's got to be some pick upable thing, like a gun over here. So we make like a little table or something like that. Not going to spend a lot of time on the artwork here, but just to get the idea. We say, okay, we learned this jumping mechanic here, and then the door opens, we progress to the next area, and now there's something on the table. We sort of have to pick this up. Let's say there's like a barrier. And this is actually done in some of the, maybe Call of Duty or something like that. They literally have a tutorial area like this where you learn the game mechanics. Even though most people by then, they've played Halo, they've played other shooter games, but it's still important to incorporate a space like this. So you learn that stuff, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe there's like some zip line for no reason. Let's just say you were putting a zip line in your game and that's going to be one of your other core mechanics. And you say, well, what's the zip line going to do? Well, you're going to have to go from up high to down low. And the player is on like ground level here. So we got to build a staircase. See, and now we're letting the purpose design the level. You're saying, well, why do we need a staircase? Because we have to get up higher so we can learn how the zip line tool works. And then maybe you have sort of one big finishing area over here. You say, okay, just so players are learning this, we have our zip line go from way up there to way down here. And so then again, you have purpose driving the design process where you're like, okay, players are going to come up here, and then the UI is going to say, well, here's how you operate the zip line, and players zip lines over. Now they've learned the jump mechanic, they've learned the pick up the gun and shoot the targets mechanic, they've learned how to zip line, and you have literally like three different pieces of your game already built out. It's like your intro level is designed by thinking about what the purpose is going to be and then letting that help you design it. Later on, you can come back here and say, well, this staircase is boring. Like, okay, well, let's add like a curved staircase or let's add a spiral staircase. Whatever stuff you want to do, you can always change that later, but at least you have a fleshed out idea for what you want and why you need it there. So, if you got any questions, let me know, and I can always make more videos on this stuff and we can build it out in 3D. I was going to take this and build it out a little bit in Blender, but I just don't want to spend too much time on it if it's not necessary yet. So, when you guys want to see more, let me know.